Hello, I'm Ruth at the Garrett Public Library, and I'm here to welcome you here today to listen to some short stories for our Railroader reading. I have three short stories today taken from the May issue of Reader's Digest, and they're not very long stories, but they're inspiring. The first story that I have is called The Sunshine Mayor, and it's written by Kathy Free from the Washington Post. And here's a picture of the Sunshine Mayor right here. Almost 8 years ago, Al Nixon decided to begin each day from a bench with a spectacular view of the St. Petersburg, Florida waterfront. I call it Life Rising because watching a sunrise makes me feel centered before starting my day, said Nixon, who works for the city's water department. A year later, a woman stopped to say hello, and she said something that changed her perspective on his daily ritual. She said, "You know, every morning when I see you sitting here, I know that everything is going to be okay." Nixon recalled, "That's when I knew I needed to pay attention to the people walking past. I needed to make eye contact and let people know that we mattered to each other." Instead of staring straight ahead at the waterfront, Nixon started smiling at people and striking up conversations. And pretty soon, more than a few early risers began joining him on the bench, sometimes unburdening themselves, asking him for advice about relationships, careers, and personal problems. "I was happy to listen," Nixon 59 said. "I wanted them to walk away knowing they didn't have to feel alone." When you're in your 50s and 60s or beyond, a lot of people feel their purpose hasn't been fulfilled. At this stage in life, this is definitely my purpose. So every morning, weather permitting, Nixon, who has 3 grown children and a long-term significant other, rises at 4:30. He puts on a fedora, sips a cup of coffee, then drives 7 miles to the waterfront, where he'll stay for 2 hours. His presence and his openness to listen have led some to nickname him the Sunshine Mayor. Al is this calm, constant presence, said Jefferson Franzen, 64, a retired real estate developer who met Nixon while taking a walk along the waterfront a few years ago. His unique gift is that he listens to everyone. "It's more than that," said Dee Glaw, who is in her late 50s. She met Nixon while out strolling 3 years ago. "He listens without judgment and without any kind of return expected. While most people simply wave or drop by briefly to make small talk, others are anxious to step into his office and spend a few minutes with someone who will listen." No matter what problem a person wants to air, Nixon lends an ear. You have to have an open heart and an open head because you never know who's going to walk up and what they might need, Nixon said. "Every person who stops by the bench deserves my undivided attention." He remembers the day a couple came by to talk about problems in their relationship. The husband was always working, rarely home, Nixon said. "It was ruining their marriage." I told him, "My friend, if your wife's revelation didn't scare you, then maybe the possibility of losing her will." Nixon was right, the man admitted. "He started to cry and agreed that he needed to slow down," said Nixon. "We all hugged each other, and we became friends after that. I still see them every now and then over lunch." "No topic is off limits," Nixon said. "But some people sit down and don't want to talk at all. They simply want to sit next to someone and share the silence. A woman stopped once and said, 'I just want to sit here with you,'" he recalled. "We stared at the water for an hour. Then she said thank you and walked away." She just wanted a moment of peace and to know she wasn't alone. And in that moment, in that hour, on that morning, she truly wasn't. My next story is entitled Out on a Limb by Dana Hedgepath from the Washington Post. This is a cat rescue. For the most part, Hank, a 2-year-old tan and white rescue cat, is a homebody, and for good reason. The one time he got out of his yard in Washington, D.C., he managed to get stuck in a 60-foot-tall tree for 5 days and 4 nights with no food or water. Hank's big adventure started last November 6th. Dolores Bushong, his 75-year-old owner, had just returned from a farmer's market when she realized Hank hadn't come in for his midday snack. She called his name in alleys and streets around her home. As it got dark, she began to worry. Then she heard mewling, looked up, and spotted Hank perched on a branch near the top of a neighbor's tree. Bushong believes Hank got under a fence and then became spooked by some dogs. The more scared he got, the higher he climbed. Cats have an amazing ability to climb up trees, but actually they aren't that good at climbing down, said Dan Deramal, Director of Field Services for the Humane Rescue Alliance. Bushong, now worried about getting Hank down, asked the HRA, the Humane Rescue Alliance, to take the lead, but it was no easy task. HRA called the fire department, but it declined to help, citing safety concerns. Then Bushong called a construction company to ask about renting scaffolding, but was told she would have to book the equipment 48 hours in advance. Or 48 days in advance, Next, she reached out to a local tree company, Casey Trees, where she volunteers, helping with planting and trimming. But the crew that came out analyzed Hank's predicament and said it wasn't safe for a person to go up into the tree because the branches weren't sturdy. Bushong was crushed. To realize something you love is in trouble and you personally can't do anything about it is very frustrating, she said. Cue the neighbors, Ed Baptist, whose tree Hank had climbed, let Bushong sit in his backyard and called to Hank. Another neighbor donated a can of sardines, hoping it might entice the hungry cat to come down. Nearby dog owners took their pets on walks instead of letting them out in their yards to avoid further spooking Hank. One neighbor suggested Bushong call a local business, EJ's Pest Control, which had a tall ladder. She did, and the owner, Ijeoma Medeforo Berry, told her she was welcome to it. I don't have pets, but I'm human, and I do have a soft heart, said Medeforo Berry. Unfortunately, the 42-foot ladder proved too short. By day 5, nothing had worked. That's when Lydia Krasinski, a veterinary assistant at HRA, told another staffer how her sister and brother-in-law got their cat down from a tree. They created a makeshift pulley system by looping a rope around a tall branch, then raising a basket with some of the owner's personal items. The cat, lured by the familiar scents, climbed into the basket and was lowered from the tree. Durama decided to try this approach with Hank. Bushong filled a small crate with some of Hank's favorite things, catnip, food, a pair of her slippers, a fuzzy blanket. They called it Hank's Party Pack. With the help of volunteers from Casey Trees, they used a contraption that shot a beanbag attached to a rope high into the tree. They got lucky on the first try, as the rope caught a branch directly above Hank. Pulling on the other end of the rope, they positioned Hank's party pack just beneath him. To their great delight, he jumped in, and they lowered him. Once on terra firma, Bashang scooped Hank into her arms, cuddling him hard as he purred. Afterward, they went inside and ate, and Hank rested in his favorite chair. The next day, Bashang recalled when Hank wanted to go outside. I said, "Oh, no." After some fence repairs, though, she let him out in her backyard, where he seems content to stay. Hank's adventure taught his grateful owner a lesson about neighbors helping neighbors. "I can't believe how many people went out of their way to help me with this cat," she said. "No one ever said, 'You're being ridiculous.' It made me feel good that I live in a neighborhood where people would do whatever they could to get him down. It gave me hope." Now, my last story is entitled Nothing But Net, and it's written by David Waldstein from the New York Times. Here's a picture of a man here that does this project that you're going to hear about. One of the most gratifying sounds in sports is the whoosh of a basketball snapping the netting on a perfect swish. Take away the net, and all that's left is the unsatisfying silence of a ball pushing air molecules around as it sails through the rim. Did it even go through? Sometimes it's hard to tell. That's why Annabelle Amador, a former real estate agent from New York City, regularly dips into his own pocket to buy brand new nets for playground rims. For the most part, the city does not provide them. "Without the nets, it is just not good," Amador said. "No one prefers to play that way." So, for the past few years, with the help of a stepladder he brings from his apartment, Amador has been buying basketball nets and fastening them to the rims at a handful of playing grounds near his home in mid-Manhattan. The New York City Parks Department maintains 1,800 basketball courts around the city's 5 boroughs, where some of the best games in history have been staged without a single fan watching. It isn't feasible to keep nets on all the rims in all the parks, so the city doesn't even try. "I understand it," Amador said, "because there are just so many parks that they would have to be putting up nets all the time. That's where I come in." Amador's small civic gesture is one of many little acts of altruism that tend to go unnoticed, yet help sustain a small measure of quality of life in a crowded metropolis where the mythology of playground basketball is a matter of city lore. Last year, a group of players at one playground, St. Vartan Park, waited patiently as Amador, then 55, carefully balanced atop his ladder, finished fastening new nets to the clips under the rims before wiping down the backboard with a rag. When he was done, they cheered. "It is much better for everyone with the nets," Amador said, sharing a huge smile. Originally from Rio Piedras in San Juan, Puerto Rico, Amador moved to New York City almost 30 years ago, working in real estate until recently. He is looking to branch out into something else, but in the meantime, he plays basketball 2 or 3 times a week and replaces the nets at his favorite courts as needed, roughly every 9 weeks. "The amount of play that these parks get is surprising," he said. "It's a lot, and the nets really don't last." But at St. Vartan, Amador makes sure that every good shot is a splashdown through the feathery nets he buys on the internet for about $10 a piece. Once, when he was putting up some new nets, one of the regular players gave Amador $20 to help defray his cost. The player was astounded that someone would be so generous with his money and time. "I thought he worked for the city," the man said. "He was very meticulous, And then he brings out a long brush and wipes down the backboards. I've never seen that before. Amador says he does it simply for the love of the game. Because every great hoop star has a nickname. LeBron is King James. Irvin Johnson is Magic. Amador was asked if he had one. Beaming, he replied, "I was thinking maybe the net changer." And that's the end of our stories for this week. I hope you enjoyed them, and we please invite you to come next week for another session of Railroader Reading. You have a good evening.